Hey everybody, Matt here. This is video 2. This is the ATS adapter turbo kit install. And you'll see that it's already kind of mocked up on there, and I'll explain that in a second. But before I do, I just want to correct one thing I said in the last video, and that this was a ATS built motor. What I meant to say was a TCS built motor and an ATS built turbo kit. So with that being said, what's going on with this is I was filming it with a GoPro, and it was a fully charged battery, and about 30 minutes into the install, the battery died and the camera shut off. So I'm just going to shoot this while the GoPro charges, and I hope it saved the video because I was showing as I went through where I was hitting into issues and things like that, but I'm going to try and explain it before I go any farther with this right now. So this is the adapter piece, and let me get that out of there. This is the adapter piece right here, and it's really well made. It bolted right on, no problems. This kit does not come with the exhaust manifold to the adapter side gasket, which is just the stock gasket. Since this was a full build, I had a full gasket kit, so I just grabbed that. It does come with the gasket for down here. Now, one thing I noticed is I'm using, let me grab one because I have a spare one over here. I was using safety hardware at the urging of Mark Holbrook, and the reason why is he has a similar kit, and one of the bolts for the adapter kit came loose, causing an exhaust leak. And for some reason I can't find the nuts, but I'll show you. So these bolts, they have slots in them, and in those slots you have a locking ring and then a C-clip that holds them from falling off. And what you do with those locking rings is you put them against something hard so the bolt can't turn in the direction to loosen it. So one of the things I found, and granted I didn't talk to Aaron at ATS or anything like that, but these front two bolt pockets are too tight for the C-clips to expand around it and snap in. I have a couple options. I could put this on my milling machine and open up this pocket a little bit, which I really don't want to do because the piece is beautiful and I don't feel like possibly damaging it or going into the air passage or anything like that. It shouldn't. There's a 1/4 inch material all the way around, and I only need like a 1/16 of an inch. But what I'm going to do on these front ones is just double nut them. So it's the back ones I'm really worried about coming loose because those are the ones you can't really see. So I torqued these to factory spec. I have the same style bolts down here. I torqued these to factory spec also. And with that, what's nice is I can always come back later, stick a torque wrench back on them and make sure they haven't loosened. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scribe the pieces so that I know exactly where these are lined up. So all I have to do is look and I'll see that scribe mark and know if they're still tight. Now, with that being said, I found I'm going to modify on this one so that the tab can fully lock on. This one goes right behind the exhaust housing. This one kind of sits off on an angle. I want to get it so it's tucked hard against this edge so it can't loosen. Same thing with this, because I never like using a sandwich plate where it's bolts on bolts and you have to hope that nothing vibrates out. So with that being said, I did find that this one was kind of hard to get to torque spec because of this bolt down here. Now, granted, that isn't a design issue or anything else like that. That is simply because of the choice of turbo that I picked, how this compressor housing and everything sits. It's actually because of this lock ring. If it was a turbo that used a C-clip or some of them use different styles, it wouldn't have been an issue. Now, where I'm at right now is this is torqued. These are torqued. These I just have in lightly because I didn't know when I was torquing all these and getting the locking collars on, if I was going to have to take this off, and I didn't want to have to crush and uncrush and recrush the gasket. So I just have this, it's snug, but not torqued to spec. So that brings me to where we currently are. I just put the downpipe on. I put the V-band clamp on. Now, normally I'm a pretty meticulous guy when it comes to keeping the car clean. So normally, let me just loosen this so I can show you. I'd want to orient this so that it would be like that. So it would be a nice, clean look. You know, you have no sharp edges, no nothing. Realistically, this is a track car. I expect to have to work on this car in the worst conditions possible on the track, because if you make this so it's hard to work on, it's guaranteed the hardest part to get to is what's going to fail on the track and leave you sitting there missing out on $1,000 day, because between trailer in the car, getting it prepped, filling it up with gas, you know, your track entry, everything else, that's usually around what I figure I spend per track day. Realistically, it's not that much, but that's what I usually budget. So I'm going to leave this sticking straight up. I'm not going to tighten it down because I don't know where this is going to need to be to mate up with the exhaust, and I don't know if this is going to interfere at all with the wastegate. So I had started mounting this. I'm going to stick my light back up here just for some extra light. I had started mounting the wastegate, and it was pretty nice. They had actually labeled that there's no spring inside. So I have to put a spring in. Now they give you, inside the box, every spring for this. So these are a strongman competition for motorsports. It is amazing how hard you have to push down on this wastegate to seal a wastegate with like a 28-pound spring, which is usually, or 23-pound spring, which is usually a combination of a you know, this size spring and one of the smaller springs that fit inside. So usually I end up asking a friend to come over and help me, and he pushes straight down on this with the force of 10,000 gorillas, and then you try and hurry up and get all the nuts started before his arm turns to jello, and he has to say, get out of the way so it doesn't blow your face off when the springs pop out. So I'm going to just mock this up so I can see how the wastegate tube is going to run, and then I'm going to pull it back off and do the springs. I'll video the spring install just so you can see. The last one I put together by myself, it took a while because it's so hard to press down on the springs by yourself, because you're trying to do it left-handed so you can turn the screws right-handed, and it's an adventure. But I want to go over one other thing, and this is something that when you buy a used turbo kit off of Facebook or whatever, I've had a couple friends over the years that have bought turbo kits and they just never run right. They're having a hard time building boost. They're always getting exhaust leaks and everything else. And it's this piece right here. And what this is it's your wastegate collar, and this fits right here. So, and what this does is that acts like the seal, and when you look at it, it just sticks up a little tiny bit. Now what that does is, if you look at this side, it fits in that channel. So the way this seals is because air coming into it would have to make a 90-degree turn and then another 90-degree turn to come out. Each 90-degree turn that air goes through, it's, I forget the exact number, but I want to say it's like 100% reduction in velocity, which it sounds crazy, but that's how windows seal, is simply for the same way. So like if you buy really good house windows, they'll have like a two humps in them, and when the air has to go around those, it reduces the air velocity so much, and that's how like brand new windows get a really good seal. So same thing, and basically what happens is just over time as exhaust comes out, it plugs this so it actually helps to seal it. And you'll see, like when you take this off, after running the turbo for a while, there'll actually be, soot migration probably halfway in, and then you get like a really nice seal. And all it is just this, and then the V-band clamp over it is also sealing it from the outside. So this is important because of this. Now you can actually see it. See that gap? That's what the wastegate aperture fully closed, and then this ring would normally, let me drop this in there. There you go. So when you actually push this up, you can see it's actually hitting that. So that's what actually allows that to seal. So if you don't get that ring, and on this with a V-band, it's you would never know if you didn't know that piece was missing, because it's going to hold it tight to this, but you're going to always have that gap in the wastegate. So if you buy a used turbo kit and you're just having a really bad time where like you're not making boost or anything else, just check that. That's something that I found on 2 or 3 used turbo kits over the years, especially on the 3000 GTs where I came from, where it's a twin turbo car. And a lot of times, people buy a turbo kit, they'll get it partially installed, the car sits on jack stands for 10 years, and then they part the car out. So it'll go through a couple owners' hands. And if you're doing it and you're selling a used turbo kit, and you take the whole kit out, and then you just see a little ring sitting there, if you don't know what this piece is, you're like, you wouldn't know what that goes to if you're not aware of it. So super important part. Just keep an eye out for those. Now, one of the reasons I like this kit is on this, and there you go, it says H2O, and then there's another one right there. So I'm actually going to run the water lines to this, so it'll be a water-cooled wastegate, and that'll help a lot with the durability of the diaphragm in there. And I was talking with Mark Holbrook about that, and he said that a couple of his guys that were running external wastegates were having issues where they're constantly cooking the diaphragms until they started plumbing in the water lines. I've already figured out how I want to do them, so I'm not super concerned with that. I'll go over how I do that once I actually install them. But definitely something I'm going to do for longevity. Now, unfortunately, I went through it before the video on the GoPro died, before I started installing stuff, everything that the kit came with. So right now, we have the adapter plate, the turbo, the gasket, the downpipe, all your clamps. I have an oil return hose, an oil feed hose. This already has a restrictor in it. I have oil drain back into the block, the gaskets for it, and then the oil feed off the block, which I probably should have put in first because it's right there, but I can still reach it pretty easy. And then the bolts for the oil drain to the block, which, now that I think about it, no, because on the block it's studs. So these are the ones for the turbo. I'm actually going to use different ones because these are mild steel, and just from years of experience, these will turn orange and then into a pile of rust fairly quick, being in a turbo. So I have some zinc coated hardware that's specifically for high heat applications that I'm actually going to change those out. They also give you, new nuts for the exhaust manifold and everything else, and new studs for the turbo. I didn't use any of them. My stock studs were really good condition, so I really didn't need to swap any of them, and I already had my own locking nuts, so I didn't use those. They give you an exhaust bracket to stabilize the bottom of the exhaust. I already have one because of the Burke exhaust, so I'm just going to reuse that one and shelf that. And then they give you brand new hardware for the flange on the bottom. So let's I'm going to get the camera set up. I'm going to clear off a spot real quick on my bench, and I'm going to grab some Allen keys, and let's see if we can block up the camera enough that I can do the turbo wastegate construction. So let's try like that. That should give a pretty good view. And then let's see. Yeah, it's kind of close. Maybe clear this off. So while I'm doing this real quick, I'll keep talking. One of the things I talked about earlier in the video also, yeah, that's pretty good, is my tool selection. So I'm not advocating going out and buying all Snap-on stuff. I mean, you'll see me using a lot of Snap-on stuff. If you have Harbor Freight stuff, that's fine. You know, anything is better than nothing. But one of the things I really do suggest is when you start getting into expensive parts, or like I'm using the security fastener, stuff like that, buy at least one decent set of wrenches, buy at least one decent set of sockets. And by decent, I don't mean Snap-on or Mac or, you know, Matco or any of that stuff. I mean, if you have that, great. But even a decent set of like Craftsman, something like that, where they at least have some kind of more rigid quality control. I've seen a lot of bolts and stuff that people have stripped out simply because, like Harbor Freight, the Pittsburgh stuff, and things like that, the open ended box wrenches and sockets really aren't true to size. So they end up with rounded off bolts, or like with the security hardware, I've seen where they'll round them off or crush the edges, and then they can't get the uh, C-clips to hold them in place, or things like that. So, you know, part of working on cars that gets frustrating is not having the right tool for the job. And sometimes you can get away with it. Sometimes, you know, it's good to have the right tool. I'm actually just going to grab this real quick, and I'll be right back. So in the perfect example of having the right tool, sorry for stepping away there. I really wasn't prepared for having to put the spring in this. I figured I was just going to run it with the stock spring that was in there. The perfect example is having a set of crow's feet. You know, it's not something that you have to have, but if you have it and you need it, you know, I've had bolts where you're using three different, you know, 14 millimeter wrenches because you can only turn each one, you know, a cunt hair, and you can't tighten or loosen a bolt. But if you had a decent set of crow's feet, or even, you know, offset wrenches or something like that, you could very easy, you know, stick a ratchet on it and turn it with no problem. And that might be something that, you know, turning one bolt might take from spending 20 minutes and being pissed off with it to taking, you know, 2 minutes and being done with it. So one thing I just noticed when I took these apart is I've used tile wastegates a bunch, and now they put alignment rings in here for the springs, which is awesome. So I'm hoping that makes it easier, because one of the old problems is you used to have to try and hold the springs centered while you smash these down. So that's pretty good. I'm actually super glad for that. I'm just looking to make sure that there isn't an alignment on these. Doesn't look like it, so it's wherever you want the top port to be. I'm probably going to put it in that orientation. All right, so in here they give you the plumbing diagram. They give you that, but they don't give me a spring rate diagram. Womp, womp, womp. So I might have to look that up on Tile's website. So these are all the springs they give you. Now, ideally, the way I usually try and set these up is that whatever boost level I want to run, I want to get as close as possible with the wastegate. And I know a lot of people say that's wrong or whatever, but the way I look at it is if the boost controller fails, I'm still going to run the boost that the car is tuned for. So, and my V-bands, I'm just taking everything out of the box to make sure that the spring rate chart is not in the bottom of the box, and I opened it from the wrong side. It is not. So, with that being said, I'm going to pause the video and look up what spring rate. I'm probably going to start with 18 psi. We'll start there with an 18 psi spring, which I think, if I remember right off the top of my head, is the black and the small blue. But I'll pause that and I'll check. I'll be back with you in 1 second.